but I think the gentleman is concerned about the very first sentence.
I'm okay with it, but I want to make sure that when you come up to the microphone, could you be clear as to which aspect, because sorry, that's me. Could you be clear as to which aspect you have a concern with, or a question about, or clarification around?
I don't think anybody is saying you must use TLS. Right.
Well, one area director said that.
Okay. Nobody in this room. I meant
insistently.
Yeah. Nobody in this room is saying that.
So I mean, we can come back. So I think I'm hearing. You know, I kind of pushed back on the must, and there was insistence, so I gave in. Now, if other people think that must is too strong for using TLS, I can come back. No, the first one is a must.
No, the first.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
No,
that's
it's
true.
a should.
Well, no, but the first one is a must. But it's for.
There's a must for using security.
Right.
That's
a must for using TLS.
That's right.
Security, not the TLS.
This is why I want to make sure that we're clear as to which part we're talking about.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So that's good. So then you should be happy.
I'm happy, but even in the first sentences that you have to use the encrypted transport, means you have to encrypt the logs.
Something's got to be encrypted somehow. So, okay. So you're not happy.
Well, not really, because it says in an environment where any such protection is required. So if you don't require TLS, you're not using TLS. When you want to use TLS, just go ahead and use TLS. And I'm okay with putting a must on the UTA draft in case you're using TLS. So problem's done.
There's no reason to reinvent the wheel. We have a BCP that tells us how to do it, so we should just do it. That way.
Well, we must do it, you mean?
Must do BCP.
Yes.
Okay, I'm fine.
Okay, so whoever's taking notes, right? I think the short story, but let me check. I mean, I think the short story is, I think we're comfortable with the first paragraph, with its must and its should. And we're saying we want to turn the should of the last sentence into a must. Okay, let's move on to something else.
Is that it? No.
No, I think it is it actually. The rest is different now. So that's a change related to the section on DOS attacks, and there was some incorrect claims before that TLS would help for DOS attack, and it was rightly pointed out that it doesn't actually help, and arguably you could consider it make things worse because whenever someone's trying to establish a connection, it's more load. So we've removed the wrong statement, and instead we've just pointed out that it's actually okay because in Cdni logging you're not dealing with hundreds of endpoints. Typically you exchange logging files between very well-known established remote points, so you can do usual DOS protection mechanisms such as firewalling and all these sort of things. So I don't think that's a contentious issue. Next change. Oh no, that was so the next one, that was a hot topic: privacy. So there has been a number of changes related to privacy. This one is not very significant. Yeah, so this is nothing radical here. Let's move on. So the changes on the significant changes on privacy, they'll come in the following slides because they were addressed in version 17, I think. Okay. So what was before? Yeah, those are minor changes, so we can move on. So changes from 16 to 17. Now we're on to anonymization. So, obviously there was a lot of push for making more, making anonymization used more commonly, okay, to put it in simple terms. And we'll see how that translates. So first, there was an argument made for, why don't we always anonymize? All right, and the answer to that is because there are a few cases where you want logs that contain individual IP addresses for some special, for some applications. For example, if you're trying to use logs to do default, very detailed fault tracking, then you'll need the individual IP addresses so you know which client had a problem, and you can track that particular session and at what time and so on and so on. So there was a bit of text added to explain why in some cases you need the full IP address. Okay. That's another simple changes really. I mean, when we define date and time, we actually kind of redefine them explicitly, and those are actually already defined into another RFC, so we've just pointed that to that RFC. Then there was quite a few comments around ABNF, right? And the document wasn't really clean as far as ABNF was concerned, so we've started doing a number of cleanup. Those are mentioned here. I don't think we need to go into lots of details. That's also ABNF. That's a correction in the text definition of the UUID. That wasn't correct exactly as it was before, so I tweaked that.
Same thing.
No, well, this one is slightly more important. Oh, so that's there's a slide issue here, right? An issue in the slide. I changed the title and I forgot to change the text. I did a cut and paste. So this is a more interesting. So what I did is I decided to encrypt the slide so that it couldn't be reused somewhere else. The title is correct. So the directive that contains the hash was changed. The integrity hash was turned into a SHA-256 hash. So more importantly, what does it mean? Before we actually defined a shorter hash, okay, and it was pointed out to us that it's not strong enough, right? So we increased it to 256, and also so no big deal, just a stronger hash, and then we also changed the name because it's true that it's not a generic integrity hash where you actually pick a hash. There's just one hash. It's always a SHA-256. So we may as well name it that way, right? Which we did, right? So that's it. That's what you should read in the text here. All right, coming back to privacy. Yeah, so privacy. So before, privacy was possible with anonymization of the IP address, and nothing was said about whether you should anonymize or not. So that has changed. We've now made it a should, right? You should anonymize, and we've made recommendations about a length of anonymization for IPv4 address and IPv6 address. And we've also added anonymization on the port. Rest is no big deal. That was discussed on the list. We've added a remark field. This existed in the W3C extended log format. So we've just carried that into the document. So next steps. Well, there's a number of editorials. I've already addressed that, by the way. We're continuing to work with the area directors. We had a meeting this morning with Pete. The remaining of the work is mostly ABNF, and perhaps some of the ADs wanted to think a little more about privacy. But that's really what is the significant work that is there. And I think pretty much this morning we came up with an agreement on how to fix the ABNF. So I think we know what to do, and the plan is to do that, then present the change on the list, make sure everybody here is comfortable, and then move on. Comment, question?
First of all, this is Bhumip Khashnovich. I have one simple question. Is there any way to prevent multiple registration or logging for the same content or file? Is that in scope of this document or it's out of scope?
So what's the scenario to prevent multiple registration of
for
what?
the same file or some content? If you have duplicate or multiple logging, how would you identify that, or how do you prevent that from happening? If scenario like that happen?
Yeah, so can I interject here for a
Yes.
second? So, so the draft itself, so it's a good question. So we have a requirements draft document, or it's actually a RFC. We also have this draft here has gone through working group last call, as well as it's in ISG review. And so I just want to focus primarily on the changes relative to the IESG review. Have you read the draft?
I have not seen anything like that, preventing multiple registration for the same logging. So if it is out of scope or not required, is fine.
I mean, I want to
Okay.
understand your question. Are you saying, is there something that prevents the same logging record
Yes.
to appear in the same logging file?
Same logging for the same record or same transactions.
You mean a logging record for the same transaction to happen more than
Multiple
one
times,
time?
yes.
There's nothing that prevents that.
Okay, so it could happen.
Yes, so you're
Okay.
saying, if by mistake, for one session, the downstream CDN includes 5 times the same record.
And the upstream also recording, so the logging file could be flooded with, okay.
But there's nothing in there.
Nothing
that-
is preventing it from happening, that's all.
But in general, there is nothing that actually checks the accuracy of the logs that are generated by the downstream CDN. So, this is one particular case that you're thinking of, but, the downstream CDN can invent logs, for session that never existed, right? There's a much, bigger assumptions that, in logging, it's the guy who does the work that does the logging, and he send that to you. The fact that you can do twice, put twice the same record,
Same record.
is a minor thing among the whole trust assumption.
Okay, thank you.
Kent Leo, a quick question, clarification question, Francois. So you mentioned about the version 1.0 for that specific draft by RFC.
Yep.
I guess for the URI signing, we added a couple more fields for URI signing. So would that be part of 1.0, or how? I just want to make sure that we're clear on what that means.
Let's take it all down. I think I'm late, and,
Okay.
and I need to understand the question better. All right, so that's it, and we'll continue. Read the document. Please check the changes. I'll post them on the list. And if everybody's okay, we'll just go ahead with the document.
Great, thank you. So the next one is a remote speaker, correct?
Yes.
All right, so we'll see if this works. I've actually never done this. So Ben, go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Cool. All right, if you go into the next slide. So with the metadata document, we've done a number of updates since last IETF that came out of some of the comments that we got from the independent reviews. We still had to address, so we did that. And then, like Francois talked about earlier, we as authors did sort of a cover-to-cover review and tried to spot anything. So there was a few things that we spotted that we'd missed. There were some references that needed updating. There were a few things that we changed for kind of interoperability. So there were bits that we'd noticed that we maybe underspecified. So we put in stuff for that. So an example there is we say that we've got a list of host indexes and how to determine if one's matched, but we didn't actually clarify that the first one that you match against is the one that you must use. So we clarified that. We have a table that describes different flags that can be set and the behavior expected for different combinations of those flags. And we'd made a mistake in there where we got a situation where effectively the metadata is marked as incomprehensible, which means that it needs to be transformed, but a previous CDN didn't do that. But it's also mandatory to enforce, which means it needs to be applied. So in that situation, essentially, the metadata being passed is corrupt. So we now specify that downstream CDN shouldn't deliver that, must not deliver that. Do you go on to the next slide? We had some footprint types that we allow people to specify for access control lists. But we'd forgotten to specify how to encode those into JSON, so we added that. We added some extra text to clarify what's expected. So in a scenario where a downstream CDN tries to get some metadata and is unable to, so maybe it gets a error status code from the upstream CDN, or maybe it can't contact the upstream CDN, what it must do there. And what we say is, unless the downstream CDN's got all the metadata that it needs to deliver a piece of content, it can't deliver it, because there might be some mandatory enforce stuff in there that it doesn't know about. And the downstream CDN is allowed to cache metadata responses according to the normal HTTP rules, and one of those is stale if error, which means if the origin sets a stale if error cache control directive, then it enables the downstream CDN to carry on with the last bit of metadata it had, even if it's aged out.
Ben, this is
Yeah.
Jan Sedov.
Yeah,
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
All right.
Yes. Yeah.
I have a question to the last point. I don't know if you were talking about that yet, the my media types. So this affected also the footprint and capabilities semantics draft that we have, because you made a couple of changes where you used to have more registries and now you have more media types, right, in metadata. And maybe you can comment what those changes are and why you made them. And
yeah, I can.
Okay.
So I think I've got that on the next slide.
Ah, okay, sorry.
No problem. So yeah, Jan's right. We updated a table we had to list all the media types that we're using, and then we removed the generic metadata type registry. So what that was registering was the type of each metadata object, which is a MIME type, against whether it was safe to redistribute or mandatory to enforce. And actually having that stuff in a registry, we felt didn't make sense, because mandatory to enforce or not is defined by whoever specifies the semantics of that metadata object. And whether it's safe to redistribute or not, the value of it depends on something the upstream CDN's doing. So it sets that at runtime effectively. So we don't really need a registry for that stuff. So we took it out. John.
Hi, Ben. This is John Peterson. So obviously I want to talk about the expert review and the INF policies on this. So why is having the MIME doctors review this better than having expert reviewers assigned from Cdni do it? I ask that in the sense that, I mean, if I'm a MIME doctor, I understand how to look at like a JSON object and figure out if this seems like it's, has reasonable syntax and semantics, but I don't understand whether or not a host index field that is specific to the metadata of Cdni is similar or dissimilar to this IP address field, say. Like there's a semantic dimension that you get from doing an expert review for these things that is done under Cdni with Cdni expertise that goes beyond just do you understand MIME well enough? So is there some benefit that we're shopping for here?
No, I don't think that there's a benefit. So the types previously were still MIME types, and the MIME types would need registering. What we had in this registry was stuff that isn't static, essentially, or doesn't need a registry to record. If we want an expert review to review a metadata kind of extension spec, we can say that, but I don't think we create a registry just to force that to happen.
Well, yes and no. I mean, this is one of these IETF kind of processy design issues of how you set up your architecture. So, I mean, if you set up this way, what it means is that any new metadata field that's going to get defined is going to be vetted by somebody who knows MIME really well and understands the properties of the accept header and like HTTP semantics for that, but not somebody who has any idea about the semantics of metadata fields. And to me, at least, that strikes me as an insufficient bar, frankly. Especially if this is going to come down to should it be, generic, right? So these are your mandatory to enforce or safe to redistribute. These are, I guess, implementation constraints. Like if somebody's supposed to judge like an implementation constraint like that, is it appropriate for this new metadata field being defined to be MTE versus STR, which seems like it might be a significant thing? You want somebody who understands the semantics of Cdni to evaluate the proposal.
Okay, I think we can take it offline. I mean, I think if we want someone to evaluate metadata proposals, let's come up with a way of saying that we can agree on. I'm not sure we need a registry for that, or can we just state that as an expectation that people bring their extensions here?
I mean, it wouldn't be a 5226 policy. If you want to make this a non-IANA policy, I mean, there's no process way to do it, right? IETF specifications outside of those process specifications don't constrain like the behavior of the IETF, right? They constrain protocols. So, I mean, typically the way you would do this is with a registry. But this is kind of to a meta point too, because this whole architecture of the media types then and how these are now distributed across the metadata draft and the footprints draft, which Jan alerted me to, which is why you were all graced with my presence today after so long. I can't even figure out where to find half this stuff now, right? And this is exactly what I was yelling about the last time I was here. Yeah, I don't even know where like some of the footprint specification stuff is that's for geofencing versus for Cdni footprinting. And I mean, so I mean, this just creates another layer of like indirection that I don't understand.
Which could be a fair comment, but it's kind of a bit wider. I think, how does the working group document the different media types or the different footprint types or whatever across their documents? Is kind of a bit wider than just the metadata document. Well,
but this is again what Jan was telling me about. I mean, this was changed to metadata and that caused cascading changes in FCI that were they discussed in the list? Was there any? But this is the problem because of this chain that we set up now. If you make these kinds of changes, it's going to have these cascading dependencies, and little bits are going to end up on the floor that we can't find anymore.
But
so I mean,
this hasn't changed any of the semantics of the metadata draft. We still specify what we specified before, or all we don't do here is have a table with a registry recording that in a summary.
I thought there's at least some text I saw deleted from FCI when I was looking at the diffs that now ended up in metadata. But Jan, correct me if I'm wrong.
So Jan Zedov, just to be clear, I mean, I also checked metadata, the latest version, and of course we revised the FCI semantics document. The specification, in my opinion, is correct. So there's nothing wrong. It's just that you know, you used to have a lot of registries and metadata that was referred to in semantics. Now you have less. So there is some dependencies. I mean, John, we talked about this. My opinion is we have these dependencies. They're a little bit ugly, but at this point in time, it's probably what we have to live with. The bigger question is the question you raised before. Do we have the right kind of oversight for new MIME types or new registries? I think that's the more important question. The other one you are not happy
with.
The thing
where I lost that argument. Yes.
Yeah. So the other one, maybe, yeah. The other one is more we are complaining, but at this point in time, that's how it is. But I think the bigger issue is the first one you raised. And there, I'm not an expert. John is much more the expert on this. You know, how do we extend this? What does it mean in the future?
I know. I reserve the right to say I told you so.
Right, but
so I think with if the concern is over, have we got the right level of oversight? Let's look at that section and say, what do we want to change? I'm happy to take guidance on that. I mean, apart from the registries.
So Jan Zedov again.
What we,
I had some email exchange also with Kevin regarding this issue because I wasn't so sure what it really means. And again, from a syntactical perspective or from a is the specification correct perspective, this all looks okay. It's just what John was saying, as far as I understand John correctly, is that we now have more MIME types and less registries, and that means that for certain things, if you want to extend them, you have a different guy in the IETF reviewing the extension. That's basically what it means. And this is a working group document. I have no strong feelings. John has a bit stronger feelings. We need to discuss as a working group, what do we want? What is the right level of oversight? And or what is the right, when we have extensions, who do we want to review them? That's not a that's the way of life, right? We have to decide as a working group.
I agree with that.
What do we agree on? And
that's
So
Jan and Ben, that's a working group level consensus thing that we inherit.
Right. So I
the
think
working group can
agreed
decide what level of oversight they want.
And sorry, I just want to recap. I mean, I think we've agreed we don't want to reopen the where we distribute things. So yes, I think there's one valid question, which is what do we specify for guidance and oversight for new allocation? And Ben is saying, help him define that in the document. You guys want to do that? Help him and try to define what sort of oversight is needed and what's the right process or procedure to make that happen.
Sure. I mean, the question of whether we want to retain these MIME types or revert to something close to what we had before will, of course, cause cascading changes back into the FCI semantics document if it's altered. And perhaps other places. Again, I don't really understand the web of interconnection that now surrounds the definition of these attributes. But
again, that's why I'm saying it's a general decision the working group needs to make once, and then it affects all the documents, right? That's exactly
it'll affect all the documents. And I mean, this is not something that we're just going to go off. I mean, there's like a discussion to be had. Like, do we need MIME types for something, or are we planning on putting these MIME types in like an accept header? Because there's like 30 or something of them defined in there. I don't know what the semantics is of putting 30 distinct MIME types in an accept header, like what HTTP will do or not do if you partially support them. And I mean, we thought, if there's some reason we need MIME types, like we're going to use them for something like that, then we can talk about it. But if this is just being chosen because it has an alternative semantics for review, I think it's a bad review, strategy.
We're not using MIME types just for the review. I don't care about the review. They go through whatever review that goes through. We're using MIME types as a way to signal the type of response you get across the API effectively that we've defined.
So they're being used. So they're being used in content type. I understand in HTTP. I mean, are they being used in any other capability negotiations? Yes. Are there dispositions associated with them? Is there?
They're used effectively as a content type or as an embedded content type within a document.
But these documents will have multiple of these types in them. Like a single metadata object will contain a bunch of these different types, or is each metadata object scoped to a single type? Again, I don't know the object structure that well, so.
It's completely down to the upstream CDN and how they want to serialize it, but you can do either.
Okay, so you can have a single MIME object that'll have 27 types or more.
Yes.
Yeah,
like
see, I think
this
is where we would call for help from the applications area, because I think the semantics of HTTP and that might be interesting.
Well, you look to do it. I mean, it's essentially a kind of RESTful HTTP API, essentially, we've defined, where you associate a data object with a resource and you discover those resources and download them depending on what you need.
All right. We can take this offline. I mean,
yeah, I think we're
sure.
running late. So can you maybe, Ben, take an action item on that to continue that discussion with continue it on the list, but in particular with yes. So continue that discussion.
Yeah. I can write something on the list.
Continue the argument on the list. Bamip, sorry, we have to move on.
Just very quick question. Ben, is the deduplication is part of this metadata interface or it's out of scope?
It's out of scope.
Thank you.
Okay. So quickly, what's left on the draft? And it's my view that none of this really prevents kind of working group. That's cool. We found a bug in one of the examples that we fixed but not published yet. when the login draft settles on what to say about TLS in its security considerations, we'll copy that. We followed the login draft example on doing media type registration, and if we get any more comments or comments on last call, we can address those. That's all I had to say.
All right, so that takes us to the question as to can we move to the working group last call? Why don't you try to make some progress on the MIME type discussion, maybe before we do the working group last call? That might be an important discussion. So let's try to settle that discussion, and then you can issue a new rev. By then we'll have the TLS text frozen. You can do that update as well, and that would be ready to go to working group last call. Is that right, Ben?
That would work for me. That's fine. Yeah.
Okay. Everybody's happy with that plan? Okay. All right. Thank you, Ben. Jan, it's your call. So we're pretty late, Jan. Hopefully we've discussed one of the key questions you wanted to bring up in here. If you can make up time, that would be very good. No.
Wired, huh? Does this work?
Yes.
This works. All right. So I'm just grabbing this one. So FCI semantics next. So we have 3 drafts. So one is the semantics drafts. No, it's still not working.
Real quiet.
Hello.
Just talk close to it.
Hello. Okay, I'm trying to talk as close to the mic as I can. So so we have 3 documents. One is a semantics draft, and the 2 others are the solution documents. Remember, we split the solution into 2. One defining the JSON object format and one defining the transport currently via Alto, because we decided maybe we want to have other transport mechanisms for the JSON object format. Now I'm talking about the semantics document first. We had a review by Juliana, and I posted also on the mailing list. We now believe we have addressed all the comments. So we had an individual review, and we think we addressed all of them. We significantly also polished the text recently, so that the draft has been, the references and also some other editorial stuff. So we think basically the draft is ready for working group last call, except that we also had a long discussion on the mailing list on how we would, spread registries and everything over the documents. And here's just a reminder how we did it. The first 2 points from me are okay. The 3rd and the 4th point, you don't see the 3 and 4 here, are okay, but we have some changes because now we have also the dependency that in our document we switched a bit to MIME types, because Kevin is the author of this document and the metadata document, and he informed me, so he made these changes, which, as we had the discussion just now, are tentative, so to speak. So I'm presenting, next slide. So basically I wanted to present here the differences. This is, here it should say old, here it should say new. So the bottom is new. We used to have a registry. Now we have MIME types, where we have registries, then in the 2 registries in the metadata draft that define allowed values for these MIME types. And we have a 3rd registry for redirection mode in the semantics document that defines the allowed values for, or the allowed types for the 3rd MIME type. That's what we have currently. So again, as John was complaining, we have some dependency, but I think I'm also not happy with this dependency, but I think I'm just trying to make it clear here what the dependency is we currently have. It's not good, but I think we have to live with that. The bigger question is, again, do we want to move to MIME types or not? We had this discussion just now, so Francois, it just affects this document as well. So the working group needs to decide what do we want to do, right? So we used to have a registry, now we have more the MIME types, and yeah, same question. Next slide. So to sum up, so the question is, the first question here is the MIME type versus registry. We had the long discussion, so we need to make a general decision in the working group. I think it affects both documents. And the second point I was making here is again, the complaining, we have it spread over. It's probably confusing, but I think at this point in time, we should proceed just to, make progress with the overall Cdni work. Next slide. So yeah, the solution document, the capabilities document, Kevin updated to reflect the MIME type thing. So if you go to the next slide, I just wanted to give an example how it looked. So one thing is also now we only have HTTP allowed as a protocol because Ben just presented that the metadata guys decided for now we only have HTTP and HTTPS. This is how it looked before, and this on the right side is how it would look with MIME types. I checked it. It's syntactically, it's just it's not a big deal. The question is rather, you know, semantically, is it a difference? Next slide. The last point is the Alto document. I updated it, I polished it and everything, but I didn't make the changes to this the MIME type thing. So it still has the old code because for me, I wanted to wait. You know, where's the working group going? Of course, I can update this document as well. I didn't, in this respect, I didn't do it right now. So to sum up, if you can maybe, yeah, okay, go up again. For the semantics document, up, here, maybe. For the semantics document, we think we are ready for working class call, except also like you had for the metadata document, we need to have a general decision, how do we want to do the registries and the YANA considerations. Other than that, again, Juliana made a good review, a thorough review. We addressed all these comments. We polished it again. I think it's ready. It has been iterated quite a lot. So this is the last piece, basically, the YANA consideration. So I hope if we have some agreement on that, we can go to working group class call. I see the chairs nodding, which makes me happy that you also think, you know, we should move this forward to working class call once we have clarified this, you know.
Yes, I think so. Same plan as meta. Well,
all right.
As metadata. Yeah, you work that out.
All right.
That question about registries versus MIME types and.
Yeah, and in my opinion, again, since these are working documents, we really need to have this discussion on the mailings. We should have it as soon as possible, and people can raise their voice. John has a clear opinion; he raised it. Maybe others have other opinions, and then we, you know, need to see how we go forward. Alrighty, thanks.
Thank you.
Was that fast enough?
That was great. Good. Perfect.
Ray, you'll be next. No, the redirection.
Yeah, you take the notes, right? No.
Yeah. You're the minute.
You're already note taker, right? I'm the note taker. Okay, great. The next interface is the redirection interface. Next slide, please. Oh, this is.
Yeah, it's not me.
Can you guys read this or? Okay. Anyway, I'll download the slides and then you can see them. We went through the 3 new versions since Hawaii. We've had a lot of reviews from Francois, from Kevin, from Bert, very thorough reviews. Nothing too major, so they're mostly minor edits. I've listed them here on the slide, but you can't see them probably. We clarified the use of the Cdni path field for loop prevention. We made some minor changes to the signaling of the DNS redirection. We added some recommendations on the case where you have duplicate headers in the HTTP request. We added a lot of error codes, and we fixed the terminology. Next slide relates to TLS. I expected a lot of discussion here, but I think we already had a discussion in the logging draft, so I won't go through the details here. We'll just use the same approach as we do in the logging draft. So that means we reference the UTA stuff, and we use a should. And I think the rest of the stuff we already discussed, right, and with regards to logging. Next steps, we'll push a new version, including the reference to the UTA draft. And after that, I think we should be ready for sending it to the steering group.
Sounds good. And the one comment is that never use gray font with regards to text. So looks great on my laptop, by the way. No, thanks. That was a good.
Okay, great. That was short.
Hey, well, actually, one question I have: is there any? I mean, is it worse for you to like? You know, when you go to IETF review, one type of scrutiny you'll get is about privacy.
Yeah.
Have you thought of privacy and
well,
is it covered? Is it
in the redirection draft, there's one potential issue with privacy, but that's a necessary one in the sense that
you need to pass the IP address.
You need to pass the IP address of the client in order to do the redirection, and I think that's the only client-specific thing that we pass, and I think it's very difficult to take that out.
Well, I mean, one could argue that, you know, if you mask the IP address a little bit, that's still okay to select the cache
like
correctly.
masking the last 8 bits or something.
Yes.
Well, yeah, I didn't think about that, but yeah, that could work, I guess. I would have to go through the draft a little bit to see if it changes anything else, but in general, yeah, why not?
I mean, do you want to do that before going to ISG? Because my guess is you'll get some.
The question is a little bit, I mean, basically what you would do if you would mask the IP address, then the gain you have is that the downstream CDN doesn't know what the client IP is. But the entire function of the redirection draft is that a couple of seconds later, it will hopefully get the request from the client itself. So the question is what you really gain by doing that.
So that, for example, is a good discussion that you would want to put in the draft.
Yeah, we'll do that. Yeah.
Jan Seedorf. So I have a question, Francois. So privacy for me is a strange term because the CDNI specifications are among companies or among CDN providers. For logging, of course, there's a lot of privacy involved because, you know, you exchange potentially who downloaded what or whatever. But for some of the interfaces like FCI, it's not really privacy, right? It's confidentiality of privacy and confidentiality are maybe sometimes technically very related, but I don't know if when the IESG is reviewing for privacy, they most of the time talk about user privacy. So we should really consider this.
We are talking about user privacy
in this case, yes. But I'm saying for instance, you ask also for FCI or for other interfaces, maybe there is no user privacy involved. So we should just say it's confidentiality between providers and TLS or whatever encryption covers that, right?
I agree.
Different. That's different. I just want to make that point.
Right. So that's a good point. And I think other valid point is that I think all the documents should ask themselves that question and should answer that.
Exactly. That's basically the point I'm making. It's a case-by-case decision on the interface, what is really being transported. Sometimes it may be really end-user information, or related information, and then privacy is really important. I totally agree. But in some cases, it may just be, you know, provider-to-provider information, and then it's really confidential.
Agreed. But I'm adding to that this thinking needs to be captured inside each document.
Sure.
And currently,
I totally agree.
For example, there is things that are not in the redirection document, and you know, you want to answer the questions that will come up in the ISG review on that. So
yeah, that's true. We'll add that to the
Jan, as a minute taker, can you write down the point that he had something on that?
So before we go on the IESG step, do we all agree that after we add this privacy stuff and we add the TLS stuff that we are ready for that, or do we have any others? Anybody have anything else that we need to?
So I believe we are, but we should ask the room. Is anyone not comfortable with the redirection document moving to publication, basically, after the few things we just discussed? Nope, I think we're good. Thank you, Ray. Rob, do you hear us? It will be your turn to present now. All right, very good. So you're on, Rob. Please go on.
Okay, so first slide. I don't know if the slide. Oh, there we go. Right. So yeah, 2 revisions since Hawaii, both addressing reviews, lots of detailed comments. The main changes were much more consistent naming terminology in the draft and some extra descriptive text. No functional change to the interfaces though. And updated the security considerations to describe the risks of it, what information you might leak by getting hacked on this stuff. So second slide, last slide. So The remaining work, I think, is to update with the new TLS text from the login draft. Nothing else going on at the moment, so probably ready for IESG review next.
Okay, thanks, thanks, Rob. Yeah, so to me, I agree. We're at the same stage. The documents now, barring the TLS thing, would be ready to go for IESG review. Actually, just one little thing. We've actually requested some JSON expert review of the triggers document, as well as the redirection document, as well as the metadata document. Just we get someone with JSON expertise to have a look at them. Perhaps we should wait until we get that review to go to IESG review.
Yeah, because as part of the shepherding aspect is that it'll be good for us to make sure that we include that took place and any changes.
Right. So,
help it during
Ray, sorry, that's valid for the redirection document. We, again, that's in the pipe. So we should be getting it within, one of them will get next week. The other two will get maybe a couple of weeks after that. So maybe we wait until we get this JSON expert review, and then we can shoot for the next step. Is that okay for you, Rob?
Yep, cool.
Okay, everyone's happy with that? Okay, so that's the plan. Thanks. Thank you, Rob. Yeah, Ray, you're on next.
Oh yeah.
You got them all? Not? Can you pull your mail? Okay. No, I'm just checking whether you're doing it or I need to do it.
Yeah, I'll do it.
Okay.
It's on my private mail, so it might end up in some spam folder or something. Yeah. So why is there a thing? Oh,
That's where you supposed to stand for the camera.
yeah. So we have, as a working group document, we have a draft on URI signing, as you all know. And in a couple of months ago, or that's already 8 months ago, actually, we received a liaison from MPEG, the DASH group more specifically, to request us to check whether we could make sure that our URI signing drafts, where it already works with MPEG Dash-like content. So that means segmented content. We discussed that on the list for a couple of months now, and we didn't send a reply to MPEG yet. So my proposal for today will be to try to decide whether we need to send something to MPEG, and if that's the case, yeah, let's make a decision on what we want to achieve there with the relationship with MPEG. So their request was to make sure that our URI signing solution, to make sure that worked for segmented content, in particular Dash. But I think it's important for us to make sure that it doesn't just work for Dash, but that it also works for smooth streaming and for HLS and for every type of segmented content, which makes the issue a bit more complicated. So the main issue with Dash, if you go to the next slide, and with HLS and with smooth streaming and so on, is that there's this concept of a manifest file or an MPD. So what you do is you have a user agent, and at some point it requests this manifest file from the content provider. So it sends a request over some trusted link, and we have no idea what a trusted link is, but it's trusted in some way. The next step is, if you go to the next slide, please, that the content provider, it sends a redirection to the CDN back to the client. And as part of that redirection, it will sign the URI. That's what our current spec does. And the result of that URI is of that signature is that the CDN, it can verify that this request came from a legitimate client. So the CDN will check the signature, say, okay, this is a valid signature, and it will send back the MPD to the client. So if you go to the next slide, you will see that this top part of this figure, we have some form of access control in the sense that we can check where the request is valid. Now the user agent, it received the manifest file or the MPD, and it now will start to request a couple of segments. If you go to the next slide, the problem with that is that there's no redirection involved. So there's no redirection from the content provider to the CDN. And it also means that there's no way for the CDN to check where the request is actually valid because there's no signature in the URL. And that's a problem in the sense that the main target for the CDN is to check access control for the segments and not for the MPD, because it's very easy to hand out the MPD to whoever wants, and he can then request the segments. So the question from the desk group is basically to check whether we can make this bottom part of this figure, whether we can make that work with access control. Next slide, please. What I would like to discuss today is whether we think this is a good. Oh no. Do we agree that this is a problem that we would like to solve? That's the first question. Then the second question is, do we think that we need to solve it in the current draft as part of our main work on URI signing, or do we think that's some sort of like a nice to have thing that we can solve in a separate draft or an extension or whatever? And then the third question is, I do have a proposal on the next slides, and do we think that proposal is good enough, or do we have a completely different proposal? So let's come back to these questions after I'm done with the proposal itself, and then I think we should try to have some discussion and see if we can answer them. So the next slide, I have a proposal here, and a small disclaimer on the bottom is that the following presentation may include IPR in accordance with the node well, so that's good to just have it here. Okay, next slide, please.
What do you mean by may include IPR?
I just try to be in accordance with the node well, and I think the node well says if there's some doubt that there may be IPR here, it's good to mention that. So that's what it is.
I was referring to if you knew specifically that you had IPR relative to.
I know that there's documents that may apply to parts of this. I don't, and if we ever come to a draft or whatever, I'll make sure that there's proper IPR disclosures, just as there's with the other Cdni documents.
Sounds good, thanks.
Okay. So the proposal is to use a form of chained tokens, in the sense that you have a segment request in the CDN, and let's assume that segment request, it has some form of token. And how we get a token there, that's what we'll get to later, but let's assume that there is some token. Then the idea is that for the CDN to check where the token is valid as step one, and as step two, to generate a new token, a token n+1, and pass that new token back to the client along with the content that was requested, whether that's a segment or whether that's an MPD. And then what the client will do, it will use that new token n+1 for the next segment or for the next MPD request. And the idea is that you now have this form of chain of tokens that allows the CDN to verify for every request, whether it's a segment or an MPD, to check where that request comes from a valid client. Now there's two options for this token itself, how you transport it. The first is using a cookie. And the advantage of using a cookie is very basic in the sense that for the user agent, it doesn't have to worry about anything. It can just be a standard dash agent, a standard HLS or smooth streaming client. It could be a browser, and he just has to use the cookie, which is standard behavior, and that way the user agent will always get this token n+1 from the 200 OK and use it for the next request, for the next segment or MPD request. So that's option number one. And the advantage that works for existing UAs and also for non-DEX protocols. Then the second solution that we could decide on is to do it via the URL. So we would specify some new type of header. And in the 200 OK, we would include this header. And the client will take it out of the request and put it in the next segment request, in the query string, for example. And DEX already includes a mechanism for that. So while I believe the second solution to be somewhat more clean and more in line with the current text in the URI signing draft, the downside is that it would only work for DEX clients. So that's something we need to think about at a later stage, which of these two we need to do, or maybe a combination of them. Yes, these are the proposal to see how we could. And this is a proposal on dealing with that request. Yeah. Okay. So next slide, please. So this token validation mechanism, how does it work? The current URI signing draft, we sign a URL, and that means that we can prevent the client from getting a piece of content that is different from what was in that signature. The problem with segmented content, whether it's DES or HLS or whatever, is that you don't necessarily know which segment will be retrieved by the client, in the sense that the client is can, for example, pause playback, he can seek within the playback, go to a certain position, maybe you can fast forward. You don't know which segment the client will request beforehand. So the solution we came up to handle that is to add an information element to the URI, to the token, sort of like a path pattern. And we got that idea from the metadata draft, which also has this path pattern. And the idea is that you see it on the slide. It's like a very simple pattern that the CDN can use to verify where the segment that is being retrieved actually is valid, in the sense that it matches that particular pattern. So that's a very simple check. So the CDN checks where the path pattern matches the actual request URL, and based on that information, it can decide to either verify or reject the request. So that's quite simple to add to the URI signing draft itself, this new information element. The only thing that we would need to add is basically that in the current algorithm, we sign the full URI. In this case, we wouldn't need to sign the URI itself. We would need to sign this path pattern to make sure the client is not able to change the path pattern. Next slide, please. So now we have validated the token. Now we need to generate this new token, N+1. And the idea is to not have any state in the CDN itself. So the CDN itself should just be a regular HTTP server without any DES-specific or HLS-specific awareness, without awareness what exactly is in the manifest. So the way to do that is to add all the information that the CDN, that it needs to generate a token, to add that to the token itself. And it can do that based on the existing CDNI URI signing spec. We don't need to add a lot. The only thing I think we need to add, apart from the spot pattern, is an increment value. And the reason for that is that the current spec allows a content provider to specify for every redirection request an expiration time. And of course, if you have this concept of a chain token, we need to increment this expiration time for every new token so that it doesn't expire. And the magnitude of that increment, we can just put in the token itself and sign it so that the client can't change it, of course. And finally, we would need to add like a flag to the token that indicates to the CDN that this particular content is requested via URI signing for segmented content, and therefore the CDN needs to generate a new token in response to having verified the first one. So next slide, please. A short example. We have the same example as we had before, but now with the new system. The user agent sends a first MPD request to the content provider via some trusted link. The content provider verifies that this is a legitimate request, and it sends a redirect to the user agent back to the CDN. And included in that redirect, it will generate this new token, this new URI signing for segmented content token, with all the features that we just described. So the content provider decides on the path pattern, and the content provider decides on the expiration time. The user agent, it receives the token, it does the redirect to the CDN verifies the token, and again, the CDN, it creates a new token too, and passes that back to the user agent along with the MPD. The user agent will request the first segment, it will use the second token, pass it to the CDN will verify it, generate the token 3, and so on and so on. And as long as you make the expiration time very short, so in the order of, for example, 30 seconds or something, you can be relatively certain that it's a legitimate client, similar to how it works in the current URI signing proposal. And now you have access control over the entire part and not just the MPD part. So the next slide I have listed.
Hey, Ray,
yeah.
just real quick, we have a comment from
Okay,
the
sure,
general.
Yeah, but it relates to cookies. So I think I'll pass it on when we discuss the cookie versus the other approach.
The next slide, I've listed a few things that we would need to be added to the URI signing draft. That's basically to check whether we need, to check whether we can handle this in the current draft or whether we need a separate draft for it. And the things that we need to add is this path pattern, this time increment information element. That part is relatively simple. We need to define the signature mechanism for this path pattern element instead of the request URI. We would need to add this flag to indicate to the CDN that this mechanism is being used. And then based on whether we go for the cookie-based solution or the URI-based solution, or maybe both, we need to implement those features, which in the case of the cookie-based feature is slightly more complicated in the sense that now this URI signing spec needs to be aware of cookies. Oh, great. And in the case of the URI-based solution, it can be relatively simple. We will need to define some form of header, and then we work with the dash group in MPEG on making sure that the client actually retrieves the header from the request or from the response and uses it in the following request. But that we can fix in MPEG, hopefully. So now I think it's time for questions. And
actually, so I'll pass on that comment now. You know, the Craig Taylor was. Actually, I'll just read his comment. Basically, he says, cookies come with various burdens with regards to cause. The introduction of authentication cookies require cause support and the inevitable allowed domain rewriting. So cause is, you know, relates to the media source extension in HTML5.
Yes,
right?
you would need cores, I think, in the case where the cookie or where the manifest. Yes, yes, exactly. You would need it for the redirection between the content provider and the CDN, so the first part of the chain. That's true. Yeah, correct. Yeah. Any other
So
questions?
do you want to?
No, I was expecting a lot more questions on the.
No, on the,
That's not the
not
case,
on the,
okay.
not on the chat. So do you want to, you know, open the discussion for
Yeah,
discussion
I mean,
now?
let's have some discussion on what we believe. Do we think it's a viable thing that we need to solve? Do we think it's yeah, this is something worthwhile on fixing, or do you think, well, that's the dash and HLS case is not relevant enough? I mean, it's valid.
So just a quick question from a chair perspective. You go ahead. Oh yeah, that's right. There's no microphone. The one back there works. They made sure that one works. So one question I would have is there a risk, or what do you think the perceived risk is if we do not solve or address URI signing for segmented content, and the Dash group comes up with another solution that works for that?
Yeah, I mean, that's the main risk, is that the Dash group will say, okay, if you guys don't solve it, then we'll come up with a different solution with our own solution, and then we'll have two solutions. I mean, that's the, yeah. I'm fairly certain that the Dash group will try to fix this in some way. I'm not sure whether it will similar to this, but they will try to come up with a solution for it. Yeah.
To some extent, I guess from my perspective, maybe not as, just quickly, not as a, so take my chair hat off, is that I think that we need to solve, I think we should solve this so that we can have a consistent solution that works, you know, one solution that works then across, you know, between CDNs as well as clients requesting segmented information. Right, Juliana.
Okay, this is Juliana Oprescu. I think it's interesting. I think, well, you've basically done most of the work. I have a slight preference for the URI part, but I do recognize that it might be more immediate to do it with cookies. And I think we should definitely do something about it here in Cdni.
Yeah, so Jan Sedov, I want to second what Daryl and Juliana said. I think MPEG Dash is clearly relevant for Cdni, right? So so I'm not deeply involved in the URI signing work, but if you're telling me the current solution we have doesn't work with segmented Dash content, definitely we should consider if we can come up with a solution. So we consider working on it. I'm not saying, you know, I don't know how big of a problem it really is, and probably I don't know how deeply you have thought about it, Ray, if this is your first sketch or you're, you know, but
I've thought about it for quite some time, but yeah.
okay. See, I didn't know that. So, but what I'm saying is that definitely, as Dara said, I mean, MPEG dash is, you know, it's not some small minor amount of traffic, you know. So yeah, we should consider it. If we can, we should consider finding a solution for it.
Yeah, so I guess thank you. I'll just throw my own opinion. So also as an individual, I mean, to me, we should only do it if we cannot do it, right? It's very clear there's good reasons to do it. You know, a lot of the content is obviously segmented, and one I think important point is that I think the URI signing spec has applicability way beyond CDN interconnection. You know, there is no standard today for doing URI signing in a single CDN. There are people who are considering that document for implementing URI signing in a single CDN environment. There are people who have implemented something based on the URI signing spec from Cdni for signing within a single CDN. So I think it'll be very useful for the industry if we have a URI signing document that can be used in Cdni as well as outside of Cdni, and if it can cover a segmented content, that would be extremely useful, given this is a very vast proportion of the content. So, you know, to summarize, I think my opinion is the only reason to not do it is if we cannot agree on a solution, or the solution is very complicated, or it's going to take an extra year to do compared to not doing it. But unless any of these things come up, please, please, please do it.
Kent Leon, I just want to voice my support as well. Pretty much what Francois said, I agree.
Good. Thanks. Any other comments? Just wait until we get through all the comments. Go ahead.
Sergey Slavetsky, Ericsson. I just wanted to note that first, I think there is a requirement to support segmented content. Second, that requirement doesn't specify it's HTTP based, but doesn't specify whether it's MPEG dash or HLS or smooth streaming. And the third note is that there is a lot of content that is HLS as smooth streaming, and hopefully will be more MPEG dash content. And I'm just seconding this thing that this work group should work on it and apply to different type of content, segmented content.
Great. Thank you. That's good.
Now, with respect to the last question.
Yeah, maybe the combination of the second and the third one. I mean, they're probably related in some way.
Yeah, well, I think the second one is right. I mean, we should make it clear. But the second question is, should it be in the same document? You know, I guess yes, I'm saying, and I think a lot of people assume that when they answered it, we should do it. I think they meant in the same document. That's not true. Please say that. And with respect to the last question, so again, my personal individual opinion, yes, I think the solution you described is an acceptable solution. Well, no, there's one general approach, and then there's two variants about how you encode the token. So, you know, I'm talking about the general solution now. I think that's the right approach. With respect to the variants, so we discussed that a little bit. You know, my take, like I think other people, is that we might need to have the two variants because, you know, one of them, the cookie-based, has a number of drawbacks, limitations, but it has a fantastic merit, which is that it works with any client, right? That's a huge benefit, okay? The other one is cleaner. So maybe that's where we want to be in the long term. So I think, you know, unless it's difficult to come up with a solution that supports both, I would consider that.
Okay.
Any other thoughts on, you know, the two approaches, the cookie versus header? Kent, what's your take on the two things?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was already a kind of email discussion thread on that, right? Already, right? So For my personal, I'm not just supporting both for the reasons that you specified, right? In the sense that the cookie has that property, which is very good, to support all the different flavors. But then the UI also has good properties. So I think for now, I think it's good to at least go down that path and work out more details too, right, to understand it better. But I'm in support of that.
Actually, one extra thought. So the cookie-based approach, I think it's you don't need additional protocol element outside of Cdni, right? The cookie exists and you just
cookie exists and you use, yeah.
Right. For the header, so you'll need to go through the process of getting a header standardized within IETF.
Yes, I think we would need to have well, the interesting is you could either specify the header itself in MPEG or in IETF, but it will probably have to be a combination of both. In the second case, so in the URI-based solution, we would have to work with MPEG on specifying that, in the sense that the client needs to be aware which header he needs to extract from the response and then echo that back in the next request. So whether to specify in MPEG or in IETF, I don't know,
but you need to specify. So I think that's a consideration, because this will take time.
Yeah.
Okay. So think about that, because maybe you want to take that variant out of the main document so that it can progress as a different pace, because it will take time. So whereas the rest, maybe we can finish earlier. I see. Yeah. So think about that. Maybe
that's a good point. Yeah.
Maybe you need to structure your documents so that you don't get delayed by the header.
This new header thing, yeah.
Maybe you have a first version of the spec with the cookie, and the other one is an extension.
That's a good to think about. Yeah.
Maybe we can talk offline, but when you say define a new header, it's beyond the new IEs that you need? Is that
a new what?
Oh, sorry. I mean, I guess we're talking about defining some kind of new header. I guess I'm not quite clear, because I thought what we need for the second solution was the new IEs to carry for the additional information. Is that right?
But you basically, in the request, you can just add them to the request URI. That's easy. But in the response, it's the question how you echo it in the response. And for that, a solution will be to define a new header, like a URI signing header or something, that the client knows, okay, if I see that particular header, then I need to get it out and put it back in the next request. And for the CDN, it would need to know, okay, in the case where I generate a new token, I need to put it in that specific header.
Okay, so from a chair perspective, one of the things that we need to do is respond back to MPEG with a liaison letter, which I'm looking to you, Spencer, but we need to respond back to MPEG with a liaison letter which says that we're going to address this problem and that we're evaluating a couple of solutions relative to that. But I think it's very important that we respond to them saying that we're going to address this, so that they don't think we need to go off and address this separately.
Yeah, I think it'll be good. Yeah.
So
it'll be quite some time, of course, since they send their liaison. So it would be good to not wait too long with that.
Yeah, definitely.
A response.
Definitely. So I don't know who our liaison is to MPEG or how we respond back. I honestly haven't done any liaison letters from this direction. But we can.
You gave us some
okay.
We're supposed to write
it's fine.
The response, and I'll pick back up with Spencer and
okay.
So we should be able to find
so chairs will take an action. Maybe Jan just put that in the notes so that we remember, but we'll take an action to follow up with the liaison letter to MPEG.
And one other thing, maybe Spencer, for you, do you think we should get some sort of early review from a security person on the URI signing doc in general, just to make them comfortable with the whole notion of URI signing?
Yes.
It's back there.
Spencer, second try at a microphone. Am I remembering that Kathleen is new since the last time we talked about this? Kathleen Moriarty, the more recent area director for security.
I'm sorry, what was the question? What about her?
I'm trying to remember when the last time we talked to a security AD about this. I know that, you know, when we added the deliverable,
yes,
this was a topic. I'm not remembering whether Kathleen was on the ISG or not. So given that, I think it's definitely good to do the early review.
And so how do we organize that, Spencer? Do you trigger it, or do we go through the usual process of early review thing?
This is a good thing for me to actually say out loud. There is a mailing list for requesting reviews from all the directorates, and you can just drop a note to that for an early review.
Okay.
Great. Thank you.
All right.
Hello, this is Juliana Obrescu. I'm going to be presenting a very unprepared presentation about HTTPS. So there's no draft associated with the presentation. It was just an idea to get the subject going on the mailing list. I've had a response from Ben, but I'm presenting it now so that people can give their opinion about it. Basically, this is driven by what you can see here, a graph of HTTPS traffic going up. This is actually in terms of requests on the Chrome browser. I don't know if it's the same situation in networks that people are seeing, like HTTPS becoming more important than HTTP in terms of volume. So this is one of the things that actually drove me to bring the topic here, because I think we've done a delegation of traffic on HTTP in the clear, because that was the obvious response at the time, and it was like the need that was prevailing at the time when we started this. It's changing a bit, and I think HTTPS is becoming more and more important. So I think for me, it's like a logical next step to do. Like, we've done HTTP, let's do HTTPS now, because that's the bulk of the traffic. Okay, so when someone navigates to a web page that is being served by some server that doesn't have the actual certificates, this is what she gets in her browser. So I don't know if Daryl wanted me to do something to walk through the actual steps and where this delegation breaks, in case you don't have a proper mechanism set up. Basically what happens, you're getting served by someone who doesn't have the rights to serve you some content, so we should do that properly and have some real content delivery that doesn't give you browser errors. So as I was saying, this is just a list of thoughts that I've had. It's not really prepared or structured. My idea was that there are a few technical solutions that are available. So we've seen one previously done way was to do the delegation of security outright and do like just delegate to the CDN delivering the traffic the actual management of certificates and keys. We could do something that's a bit in between. It's like a solution proposed by Cloudflare, which is called Keyless SSL, which consists of doing a TLS API, which will allow you to retrieve only the session keys for the content that you want to serve as a downstream CDN. There are other drafts in the IETF, such as alternative services in HTTP BIS or DANE that does mostly the DNS part. So maybe we should take a look at that also and see how they're handling stuff. And there has been apparently work on the metadata interface to handle HTTPS traffic, according to Ben's email. And I bet that there's more that I haven't listed here, so maybe people are aware of such solutions.
Jan Zedov. So I know that CDNs offer something they call SSL or TLS outsourcing, where they have basically they send the key materials to the surrogate server, right? So, but what I want to know and I don't know is how common is that also to do that between a UCDN and a DCDN? Is that already existing or
not common?
Right.
No.
Exactly. So, but of course one could design such a thing. So
I mean, it's like the quick and dirty method if you want. It's just I don't want to be handling the certificates, any security part of it, so I'm just going to delegate it to the people actually delivering the content. So this works, from what I know, it works mainly between content providers and the CDNs that are actually delegating, that are doing the delivery of the content. But I've never seen it in a setting where you have two CDNs that are interconnected and the upstream CDN is willing to give their customers certificates to a downstream CDN to which the content provider has absolutely no relationship.
That was going to be my next comment. It sounds a bit problematic, right? Because you enable basically downstream CDN to impersonate whatever the content provider who delegated that possibility to you. So I don't know. I don't know if that's something.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a good solution. There's no question about that.
So I guess I'm saying option number 1 doesn't sound like a good one to me. All right.
I put it there because it exists. I mean, it exists, like it could be done. I have no example of such thing, but it could be done. Okay, so if people have more ideas about technical ways to do this, I'm willing to accept them and update this list here. I have a second slide, actually. So these are the questions about how we should probably proceed about this, if we want to proceed about this. My first question is, should we be looking at this as a working group? Which by the sounds of people is like dodgy. Okay, so we should think about that. How are we going to handle the interaction with the other working groups? Like what's happening in HTTP BIS right now with the alternative services? Should we include something like this on the charter and go to ISG review, since I'm up for it? No, I'm joking, Daryl. And I'm interested in finding out if there are people willing to work on the topic, because as I told you, there is no draft on this. So I'm willing to put up something if someone else is willing to work on it with me, probably.
Jan Zedov again. So I haven't really thought about this much, so I'm just saying what comes to my mind right now is that a proper solution would probably be a solution that indicates to the end user that the request has been delegated and the new certificate, you need to indicate something to the end user. Otherwise, you have the problem I mentioned before, that you pass somebody else's credentials along. Maybe we are explicitly considering an infinite number of downstream CDNs, right? So
Jan, take some notes about this.
Say again?
Take some notes about this.
Yes, sorry to interrupt. We've only got sort of 5 minutes left. I think the key question for today is not what is the right solution, but what do we want to do about it? But I mean, by all means, you should think about what are the right solutions, but we probably not here right now. So, I think the number one questions, if I can refine that, I think the number one question is this a useful thing to do? Okay. So let's talk about that 2 minutes, and then we'll talk about the next step. So I'll throw in my personal opinion. Is this a useful thing to do? Yes, it's useful. I mean, there's a lot of HTTPS
I mean, I know.
traffic. Okay.
Brought it up because I thought it was
I have
useful.
an opinion on that too. So more and more traffic will be encrypted. So we need to consider this.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
that is clear. I think that's a given.
Okay.
The question is, how complex is the solution? Is it within our time frame? Blah 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 blah.
Right.
But is it a problem that will occur more and more in the near future? Most definitely.
Okay.
Yes.
Good. So let's say we've established that it's useful. Do you want to add something?
Same opinion. I think it's a useful topic. I don't have a lot of expertise in the area, but I guess there are enough people here that do have that expertise. So yeah, I think we should definitely work on that.
Okay. John?
John, I think it's useful. You should do it. You should do it redirection, like Jan said.
Sorry, can you repeat the last comment?
You should do it redirection, like Jan said.
Just one concern: if in a typical HTTPS session, there's a private key per entity which is fixed. So if you want to delegate from one server to the other, then that private key is not, it cannot be sent. The private key is specific.
I think you're pretty far down into the details of a potential solution, which is a good thing, but we've only got 2 minutes to decide what we want to do, so we won't discuss that.
My point was there's additional complexities,
right?
In the whole concept of delegation.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
We agree with
so
that.
let's say there's agreement that it's a desirable thing to do. I think we need to quickly discuss what would be the next step, right? And let us throw something on the table here. Daryl, you correct me, but one natural approach would be indeed to identify the few people who are interested in working on that and do a sort of first draft on that, where you look at the problem, you start looking at the high-level solutions and start discussing how that could work, and try to be open as, in other words, don't necessarily come up with just a Cdni protocol-related solution. Try to come up with any solution, and because then we can decide whether some of the work belongs to Cdni or not, and maybe some other group has a solution. So, try to be open, not just Cdni focused. And then once we have established that there are people willing to work on that we've got some sense of the solution, then we can, make further decision as to take something on in the working group or not.
Okay.
Daryl, what do you think?
My concern here is that we're looking at where this belong. Essentially, there is no difference when it comes to the metadata about the content, about the information about the content. There is no difference whether it's encrypted or not. At the end, the content is the content, and the characteristics of the content are immaterial with respect of whether you are encrypting or not encrypting the channel in which you are distributing it. The point here is that this translates into essentially a key management problem. It's how you share keys or transmit keys or crypto material or trust material between the... Sorry?
So Jan is saying that you shouldn't do any of these and that you should use a redirection.
My point here is whether you do this or you should do this, or this is one thing. And another thing is that the problem here, when you're talking about that you're managing encrypted traffic or not, well, encrypted content, because it's not traffic which you're going to manage. It's content that is going to be distributed and encrypted. When it comes to what has been discussed in this group so far, that is about the characteristics of the content, the footprint of the downstream, etc., nothing changes. What changes is how you are going to manage the keys, whatever you used to do with the keys and with the encryption process.
Yes and no. So I disagree that this is mainly a key management problem, but for me it's more a problem of what do you signal to the user and how do you make the user aware of what's happening. So it is the end user.
All right, I'm going to cut the discussion off. So thank you. This is good. So what this tells us is that there's interest in this topic. So what we need to do now is, and I just reiterate what Francois already said, is that the next step is to write an individual draft. If you saw some people that are interested in the topic as well, so reach out to them and see if they want to help contribute to it, and frame up the problem, and then how you propose some potential solutions to solving that problem, and then let's review it at an upcoming working group.
Okay.
And reach out on the list as well. Ask people on the list if they're willing to work with you on that document as well. Not everybody's here today.
Okay, yeah, I thought I had kind of done that, and Ben was the only one going like, well, there was metadata that we did a few ages ago. Look at it.
You haven't asked whether, just say you're planning to work on a document and ask if people want to work with you. I don't think you've asked that yet.
Okay, I need someone who does a bit more security than me, so.
Okay. Yep.
Thank you.
No, thank you very much. And with that, and the ongoing discussion around certificates and keys and key management, thank you very much for participating in the session today, and have a good one.
Check this. So I'm remembering that you guys